January 22, 1943, 9:17 in the morning, west of Point Cruz on Guadalcanal. The jungle had gone quiet again, not peaceful quiet, the kind that comes right after a shot cracks out and a man drops without a sound. 14 Americans dead in 72 hours, all from the same stretch of trees, all from rifles no one could see. Second Lieutenant John George lay flat in the rubble of a shattered Japanese bunker. Sweat stung his eyes. He didn't wipe it away. He was glassing the tree line through a liminal Askin scope mounted on a Winchester Model 70, a civilian bolt-action hunting rifle he had paid for with 2 years of National Guard drill payback in Illinois. The same rifle his own captain had ordered him to leave in a tent 6 weeks earlier. Toy, they called it, mail order sweetheart. Every officer in the battalion had a laugh at the kid who showed up to war with a Sears and Roebuck special. George didn't laugh. He breathed out slow, settled the crosshairs on a dark knot in a banyan tree 200 yards out, and squeezed the trigger. The rifle barked once. A body fell from the branches like a sack of wet sand. That was kill number 1. By the time the sun went down 4 days later, it was 11. Nobody was laughing anymore. To understand why this mattered, you have to understand what the Pacific War looked like in January 1943. The Marines had already bled for Henderson Field. Now the Army's Americal Division, including the 132nd Infantry Regiment out of Illinois, was grinding through the last Japanese pockets on Guadalcanal. The enemy wasn't charging in bonsai waves anymore. They were ghosts in the canopy, trained snipers who tied themselves into palm fronds and banyan limbs with ropes, waited days without moving, and picked off anyone who showed a silhouette. Officers, radiomen, anyone who looked like he mattered. The Japanese Arisaka rifle wasn't fancy, but in skilled hands at 300 yards through jungle gaps it was lethal. Their doctrine was simple: one shot, one American, then vanish. The U.S. response was less simple. Standard issue was the M1 Garand or the Springfield 1903. Good rifles for open ground, terrible for this. Iron sights disappeared in green gloom. The few scoped Springfields the Army had issued were heavy, the glass cloudy, the mounts loose after a month of rain and salt. Doctrine said volume of fire, spray the trees, hope. It wasn't working. John George knew that before he ever left the States. He had been shooting since he was a kid, Illinois state rifle champion before the war. He understood rifles the way mechanics understand engines. When the Winchester Model 70 came out in 1936, it was the best factory hunting rifle money could buy. Smooth action, glass smooth barrel, chambered in .30-06, the same round as the Garand, but tuned for precision instead of mass production. George saved his pay, ordered one, mounted a liminal Askin scope, and practiced until he could call his shots at 600 yards on a running deer. When the National Guard mobilized, he packed the rifle anyway. Regulations be damned. His captain had taken one look and almost relieved him on the spot. This isn't a deer hunt, Lieutenant. Leave that mail order junk behind and carry a real weapon. George nodded, walked away, and quietly kept the Winchester in his sea bag. By the time they hit the beach at Guadalcanal, he had it broken down and wrapped in oilcloth. Nobody checked. For 6 weeks, the mockery followed him. Platoon leaders ribbed him during chow. Sergeants rolled their eyes when he cleaned the civilian rifle instead of the issue Garand. But George kept his mouth shut and his eyes open. He watched Japanese snipers drop men from positions the Army spotters swore were empty. He measured distances. He timed the pattern of their fire, and he waited for the moment the brass would have no choice but to let him prove the point. That moment came on January 22nd. The battalion was stalled west of Point Cruz. Every time they tried to push forward, a sniper would crack off a shot and another soldier would die. Command was losing patience. George volunteered to set up in the ruins of an old Japanese supply dump. The captain, the same one who had called the rifle a toy, finally waved him off with a grunt, "Do what you want. Just stop the bleeding." George crawled into position before dawn. He rested the Winchester on a chunk of shattered concrete, draped a piece of burlap over the barrel to break up the outline, and started scanning. He wasn't looking for men. He was looking for the tiny signs, a glint of metal, a broken branch that hadn't been there yesterday, the way a palm frond moved against the wind. At 9:17, he found the first one. Japanese sniper tied high in a banyan, rifle angled down toward an American machine gun position. George took the shot. The man fell. 30 minutes later, he found the second, then the third. By noon, he had 4 confirmed kills. Word started filtering back to the line companies. The guys who had mocked the mail order sweetheart began asking if they could borrow it when he was done. The next day, George moved to a new position, a crater left by a naval shell. He glassed for 3 hours before the first muzzle flash gave away the enemy. One shot, another body dropped. The Japanese started shooting back, trying to suppress the position they couldn't see. George waited them out. When they fired again, he answered. By the end of day 2, he had 8 confirmed, 12 rounds fired, 8 hits. For misses, he openly admitted, in the jungle that was marksmanship most men only dreamed about. The third day was harder. The enemy had figured out there was a counter-sniper working. They changed positions faster, used decoys, tried to draw fire. George adapted. He started using the sock trick his pre-war shooting buddies had taught him. A white sock over the muzzle to catch the flash and keep the scope clear. He moved every few hours so they couldn't triangulate him. The heat was brutal. 98 degrees with 98% humidity. His uniform was soaked through. His eyes burned from constant glassing, but he kept the count climbing. On the 4th day, he dropped the 11th. By then, the Japanese snipers who had owned that stretch of jungle were gone. The Americans advanced without a single casualty from hidden fire. The captain who had ordered the rifle left behind walked up to George, looked at the Winchester, and said quietly, "I was wrong." That was as close to an apology as any lieutenant was going to get in 1943. The math was uncomfortable. The Army had spent years perfecting standardized weapons for millions of men, interchangeable parts, easy training, reliable in mud, rain, and sand. It worked for most fights, but against a hidden enemy in triple canopy jungle it failed the test. One man with a precision rifle and years of deliberate practice had done what an entire platoon with Garans could not. 11 enemy snipers neutralized, 12 rounds, 4 days, the cost in American lives, 0. Word spread fast. Other officers started asking George to teach them how he picked the shots. Men who had never touched a scoped rifle before wanted to know why the Lyman glass made the difference. The technique patient observation, one precise round, immediate reposition began filtering through the division. Before long it wasn't just one lieutenant and his civilian rifle. Small teams started forming. Scoped Springfields were pulled from storage and cleaned up. Officers stopped laughing at men who brought personal weapons. By the time the campaign on Guadalcanal ended, the idea that a hunting rifle could beat a military one had stopped being heresy. John George went on to fight in Merrill's Marauders in Burma. He carried the same Winchester until it finally wore out. He wrote a book after the war called Shots Fired in Anger. In it, he never bragged. He just laid out the numbers, the mistakes, and the lessons. The Army eventually listened. Sniper doctrine changed. Precision mattered. Optics mattered. Individual skill still beat mass production when the enemy was invisible. But here's the part that still sits wrong. They had to watch 14 men die first. They had to mock the solution that was sitting right in front of them. They had to wait until one stubborn lieutenant from Illinois proved, round by round, that the toy was the right tool for the job. The war in the Pacific lasted another 2.5 years after Guadalcanal. Thousands more Americans would face the same hidden snipers in the same green hell. Some of them died because the lesson hadn't reached their unit yet. Some lived because it had. George survived the war. He made it home, finished his education, and spent the rest of his life writing and teaching. He never claimed to be a hero. He just claimed the rifle worked. The question that lingers isn't whether he was right. The numbers settled that. The question is how many other mail-order sweethearts we dismiss today, because they don't fit the manual, and how many lives that dismissal is still costing.